Greetings, Corpse Clubbers, and welcome to a brand new episode of Corpse Club, the official podcast for DailyDead.com. My name is Heather Wixson, and I am absolutely thrilled to be joined for this Halloween edition of Corpse Club by Daniel Stamm, director of The Last Exorcism. He also has the new movie Pray for the Devil out, and I also am really excited because he directed one of my very favorite episodes of the Screams TV series. Daniel, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here. Hi, Heather.
Thank you so much. As I mentioned, before we started recording, we got to chat years ago for Last Exorcism, but I am a little geeky, and you did direct one of my very favorite episodes from the Scream TV series, which I feel like so many people overlooked, and it's really fun because I think with the new Scream that came out this year, I saw so many people going back and rediscovering it and rediscovering like all these amazing directors that were working on that show at the time. And you were one of them. And I was just so thrilled by like how that show, like the first couple seasons went, because it really brought in so much great talent. And you got to be a part of that as well, which I thought was kind of cool.
It was exciting because, first of all, I'm a big Scream fan, but it was also a really good show because the scripts were really good and they really were determined to do something new with it. And I was lucky enough, I got a script that was great. That was all like about a birthday party where the killer had slipped ayahuasca into everybody's drinks. So it was like this hallucination kind of fest, which was fun. But it's funny you're mentioning Scream, because just last night I was watching a YouTube video. I kind of got hooked on this chapter true crime stuff. And the latest video was about the Scream killings that I had never heard about. And apparently they were copycat killers like that killed their best friend with Halloween masks on, inspired by Scream, by the movie. And I felt so guilty. It hadn't even ever crossed my mind working on that show that I was like, could that even happen? Is that a possibility? And I was like, oh my God, did our show have anything to do with it? But it was luckily at least before our show in 2006, I think. But what a terrifying case that was.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I honestly, I missed that too. So it's tough sometimes, I think, when you work in horror, where you're just like, especially with things going on in society, where you're like, do those lines blur a little too far? And I think also we can kind of segue into Pray for the Devil, where you have sort of, the idea of evil and how that can sort of permeate society. And I really thought it was interesting in this, where you guys talk about like, over the last few years, like there's been sort of this rise in possession, which, potentially like things haven't been going, like there's been a lot of issues in the last few years. And I was like, I like that framing because one, we just haven't seen that before. But two, I was like, honestly, if somebody told me that was really going on, I'd be like, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Well, that is really what's going on. All that stuff is actually researched. Our writer, Robert Zappia, he's a practicing Catholic.
Wow.
And he has a friend who is a deacon who put him in touch with an exorcist. So this entire movie basically comes out of a dinner that Robert had with this real-life exorcist who told him as much as he was allowed to tell him. But Robert said even what he did tell him was already so terrifying. And then it always got to the point where the exorcist said, that's all I can tell you. And Robert thought, like, what else is there? What more terrifying stuff could be there that you can't tell me? But the first draft that I ever read of the script was so full of all this research. There were like 5 different workshops in this exorcism school, which is where the movie is set. And you learned so much about what's actually going on, or what the Vatican thinks it's going on. And we kind of try to keep as much of that in the movie. We shortened it, of course, to make some room for other scenes and stuff. But everything that we have in the movie is all research and all true. We live in the high time of exorcism. There have never been more exorcisms performed and reported, possessions reported than now. You always think possession and exorcism is kind of something for the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. But it's today, and in every religion, whether it's Buddhism, Judaism, Hinduism, Christianity, all different permutations, they all perform exorcisms. So it's nuts.
Wow. Because honestly, like I think for so many of us, we're so, because of, especially as horror fans, like we sort of remove the reality of the situation. To me, that's really fascinating because you tend to sort of think of like exorcisms as this sort of thing that gets explored in movies, but like, you know, we so remove it from like our own reality. And I love that this sort of kind of takes that academic approach in a lot of ways. And I was curious for you because one of the things that I so appreciated about what you did with Last Exorcism is like we've seen so many exorcism movies. The Exorcist exists. It's so hard to like come in to this subgenre and make a stamp that feels different. And I think, you know, you did that with Last Exorcism, but I also think this really does break out and approach this subject matter in a very different way that I've never seen before. And I'm curious, was that sort of the appeal to you when you came on board to
Absolutely,
direct?
100%. After Last Exorcism, I had the feeling I had done everything with exorcism I could possibly contribute to the genre. I put all my ideas into that movie. I was done. And my agents always knew that. Don't send them an exorcism script. I was like, I'm not even going to read it. And then they sent me this one, and I called them and said, this must be a mistake. And they said, no, you got to read this. This one is different. And I read it, and it was different. And it's exactly what you're saying. It is such a narrow genre. It is so hard because you're basically making a movie for two audiences. You make a movie for an audience that has never seen an exorcism movie. I learned that after Last Exorcism. There was a boy, a 13-year-old boy on YouTube who recorded a review of The Last Exorcism, and it was his first horror movie ever. And it was such an education for me because all the cynicism, all the vanity where you really are tempted to make a movie for your peers. You know, you want your horror movie directing colleagues to go like, oh, that was really novel and stuff. But the trap would be to forget that there is an audience of 13-year-olds out there who have never seen an exorcism movie, and you owe them certain set pieces. You know, but at the same time, obviously, you have an audience that has seen 20 exorcism movies, and starting with The Exorcist in 1973, and they're just waiting to say, oh, this is just another Exorcist ripoff, you know, so you have to make a movie for them too. So what we were trying to do, that was kind of our mantra throughout the entire movie, was how do we deliver these set pieces, but give everything within it a fresh spin and reformulated for our mythology, for our world, for what it means to be possessed in this movie that maybe the 13-year-old doesn't even see. You know, it's subtle enough in there, but the audience that has seen so many exorcism movies kind of sees it and appreciates it. And so basically, for example, if you take contortions, you know, you make an exorcism movie, you need contortions. Otherwise, the audience kind of feels betrayed. But in order to not just do contortions for contortion's sake, we said, okay, what does that mean? In our world, there are two pilots fighting over the steering wheel. There is the victim, the possessed person, and there is the demon, and they are both inside of the body, and they are fighting for dominance over the body. So the contortions are an expression of that. So ideally, I should be able to stop Jackie, our lead actress, or stop Posey, our 10-year-old girl actress, anytime during the contortions and say, wait, hold it right there, freeze. What is your left hand doing right now? Is that the demon or is that the victim? And they would have to be able to tell me, you know. And we kind of tried that with all the details, all the, you know, the stuff that you have to deliver in exorcism and give everything a new spin. And what really obviously helped is that we have a female exorcist for the first time. And that to me really changed everything, because as a storyteller, you always look for the conflict potential, the conflict sources in the material. If you have a priest who is going up against the demon, then you have exactly one source of conflict, and that's demon against priest. But you'd put a nun in there and say she actually is showing more talent than any of the priests, but the church prohibits her from performing exorcisms, and she has to fight the patriarchy to even be allowed to perform an exorcism. Suddenly you have allies in other priests, but you have opponents in other priests that are saying she shouldn't be there. And suddenly it's a much richer story, because she, as a female exorcist, is more dangerous to the church and the status quo than the demon is. The church is very comfortable fighting demons, fighting the devil. It's one of their main kind of advertising thing, the service they provide. You know, they've done it for thousands of years. But here comes a woman in 2022 that says, step aside, priests, you really like yourselves in the role of the knight in shining armor. For thousands of years, you've been screaming, the same Latin Bible verses at the demon. No matter who the demon is, no matter who the victim is, it's always been between you and the devil and the demon. It's all male, male, male. Why don't we? And that was important to us, that she is not just a female exorcist, but that she comes in with a different approach, that she says, why don't we try something else? This hasn't been working. Why don't we try listening for a moment? And why don't we make this all about ourselves, but we make it about the victim that you've been treating as a mere battlefield, you know, and we see ourselves as the coach, as the therapist for this victim who is fighting for their souls and fighting for their humanity. And we are by their side and we try to help them. And for that, we actually have to know who the demon is. We have to know who the victim is. And suddenly everything's becoming much more complex. And I love that about the script, because that really opened the doors wide to do something completely new.
Definitely. And I think too, what I appreciated about that is that, you know, for as much as this is exploring, you know, sort of this phenomena of possession and things like that, I think honestly, there's a lot of parallels to, I think, the real struggles that a lot of people go through these days, where like people who have like mental health issues, and so many times we see people just sort of get pigeonholed, or just sort of people look at them because of what they're going through, as opposed to their actual experience going through it. And I think for me, it was like this like little line that I drew mentally for myself, in terms of like, you know, people are more than just like the struggle that they have, that they're really going through it. And how do you deal with that? And I don't know if that was something that was conscientious to you guys when you were working on the film or anything like that. But for me, it was like having that sort of sense of looking beyond the affliction and really looking at the person, was like, that really made a huge impression on me.
I think that is exactly right, because the female approach was kind of the therapeutic approach, which very much does exactly what you're saying, has to look at the person separate from the affliction, you know, and that is kind of exactly her and that our protagonist, comes across the fact that it's guilt and shame that allows the demon to get into your soul, kind of the stuff that you don't shine a light on, that you've hidden away or pressed in the dark, you know, never dare to look at. That is exactly how they come in, and that's what they are using against you. And that it's basically the exorcist's job to take the hand of the possessed and look at the affliction separate from who they are as a human being, and kind of guide them through that.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say something else, and it's like, I don't mean this like in a weird, like degrading way, but once I get to my point, you'll understand. But I do, the one sort of parallel that I saw with The Exorcist, that I don't necessarily think I've seen in a lot of other movies from this subgenre, is I really liked how you guys humanized the clergy in this, so the priests, and, you know, Jackie's character as well. Because like, I feel like so many times in these movies, it's like, these characters are sort of there to provide a function, and we don't really get a sense of their lives in a way that like we understand what brought them to this point.
Right.
And I really think you guys did a great job. And I like just even like the small moments of like sitting around and like drinking wine after, and like just kind of, it wasn't always just about like sitting in front of like a Bible or like something like that. Like it was just, there was a really nice touch of humanity to a lot of these characters. It was great.
Yeah, it was so great. I love doing these interviews because it's all this stuff I've never actually thought about. So when you're saying that right now, it makes complete sense. It sounds like the difference between a cop movie and a thriller. The difference that a cop movie, it's their profession, it's what they have to do to go after the serial killer, but they don't have a personal connection to it. So it's a procedural thing. Whereas if it's a thriller where the serial killer is after you or is after your family, there is a personal connection. And maybe what you're touching on is that most of the other exorcism movies are basically cop shows where the exorcist comes in, has no personal connection, is going after the demon, tries to beat the demon, and then goes away again, goes to the next job. Whereas here, we're spending a lot of time on our protagonist's backstory. Her mother was possessed, how she has been living with this demon being after her for her entire life. And she's basically now, it's as if a serial killer took out your entire family, was gone for 20 years, and now he suddenly shows up again, and you're in the crosshairs. So it's a very different angle. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that's so much of that is driven by Jacqueline's performance in this movie, and she's phenomenal. Like honestly, like we won't get into spoilers or anything like that, but I was ready for more from her character.
Uh-huh.
And I was curious if you talk about working with her because I think, again, she does a really great job of sort of bringing forth this feeling of devotion, which is necessary for the role, of a nun. But there's also this relatable, like these relatable aspects that I was like, I'm never somebody who was like would be willing to do the things that Sister Anne does, but yet at the same time, I completely related to her in ways I wasn't expecting. I was curious if you talk a little bit about working on that performance with her because she's fantastic in
He
this.
is absolutely incredible. And it's always like in these interviews, everybody is always talking about how great it was working with everybody to the degree that it almost doesn't have any meaning anymore.
Mhm.
Working with Jackie is the most incredible experience for real because she's just not only is her talent limitless, and me as a director, I could ask her for anything. I could say, let's do this scene upside down with two noses. I would expect her to grow a second nose. Like she has done stuff that you wouldn't believe possible. She's incredible. And as a person, as a human being, she is the best person to be around, which is so important because the number one on your call sheet, kind of the protagonist, always sets the tone on set.
Mhm.
And our set was lovely. The whole cast was great because Jackie exudes a warmth and a supportiveness. Like she became such a mother figure for Posey, who was 9 years old, for example. And she's just so I could talk about Jackie Byers and how incredible she is for days. But our big approach to that role was basically that we said two things. We need to know that Anne is terrified because if she isn't terrified, then the audience isn't going to be terrified. On the other hand, she needs to have a strength. So we have to find that balance where she has that vulnerability, but she also has the kick-assness, and it comes out of a rage, you know. And we just talked about it, Jackie. I saw her in Toronto yesterday. We talked about it how she is basically more or less a scream queen. You know, it has the role of a scream queen, but she never screams. Like Anne never once in the movie would allow herself to scream, and yet we have to feel that she is basically screaming all the time, and she has been screaming for the last 20 years. Yeah, so that was kind of our approach. And then we were in Bulgaria shooting. We were in quarantine, and for 10 days, everybody in their own hotel rooms. We were the first project ever to go out during COVID, before vaccinations and before anything. So it was kind of a
Oh
very special
wow.
mood on set. But Jackie and I had scheduled this Zoom call, and we said we're going to take 3 hours and we're going to go through the script, which for me meant me as the director, I'm going to talk her through the script line by line by line. So I prepared for this meeting for days. And then we start the meeting, and Jackie goes like, all right, let me tell you what I'm thinking. And she talks me through the entire script line by line in so much depth. And she had found so many interesting angles that I had never seen. And she has this talent to make big moments out of moments that in the script weren't supposed to be big moments. You know, it was just supposed to be her walking around the corner or something. But because she finds meaning in them, and she's such a great actress that it's so clear when she conveys it. You know, it's both subtle but also clear, which is what great acting is, that the audience has the feeling they just discovered something in her facial expression, like a twitch of nervousness or something, this or that, that maybe not wasn't out there for everybody to see, but it is, you know. And Jackie can produce that, and she's going to go far. We were really lucky to get her for this movie before she hangs out with the Scorseses of this world, I think.
Definitely. And I like that you brought up Posey too, because she's a young performer. And again, so much is sort of driven by what her character does in this movie as well. Because if you don't care about her, and if you're not invested in her journey as well, like you're going to be disconnected from the story. And she's so sweet, but she's really unsettling as well. And like for such a young performer, like she really puts a lot into this. And I'm just curious, like, because I almost feel like sometimes, because I've talked to like younger actors, and I think like for me, I feel like that would be like sort of an overwhelming process for them. But also, I found in interviews where they're like, "Oh no, it was super fun. I got to do all these really cool things, and that nobody would be expecting, and blah blah blah, and things like that." And I'm just like, "Wow, you're like so like." I think young performers, because of their fearlessness, like they're almost more primed to take on things like this. And I
Yeah.
wasn't sure if that was like your experience working with her.
100%. That's exactly what Posey would tell you. She wouldn't even know what difficulties you're talking about because she reminds me. I worked with Millie Bobby Brown before Stranger Things, and Millie was the same age when we worked together that Posey was, and they are exactly the same in that they are so intelligent and way beyond their years, and they both pull talent from some source that they don't know what it is and you don't know what it is, which makes it, you have to work with it completely differently, because with schooled actors you kind of can access the source of their talent because it's craft, right? And you can talk about it and you can talk them through it and all. Here with a child, it just materializes. You do one take and it's completely off and you go like, oh, will we ever get this? And then she does a second take and it's perfect and it's spot on. And I would never have gotten there with an adult actor within one take, you know. But it was hard to find her. We were desperate. We saw maybe in the end thousands of actors, definitely in the high hundreds. And you know that a production is desperate when they hire a second casting director. So they hired one in the US
Oh,
and
wow.
one in the UK, because we said we can't find this girl. And then they cast, and we still couldn't find the girl. And the real expression of desperation is when a casting director says, this girl doesn't exist in my casting folders and files. I'm now going out into schools, open casting call, schools. And that's what our UK director did. And the way we got Posey was that her sister's drama teacher said to Posey's sister, you should audition for this. And Posey's sister was on vacation or somehow was unavailable. So Posey was like, I'll go. And then she went to the audition. And yeah, we just had found her. It was an interesting thing because it was, for me, it was between her and another girl, and they were completely different. The other girl had one look that was so bone-chillingly terrifying that I was like, this look would be famous, you know, if we can put that. But she didn't have the range. And then Posey came, and Posey just had everything you were talking about, the sweetness and the relatability, and you really kind of care for her, you know. And then we kind of had to work. We had to work on the scary stuff more than on the dramatic acting stuff, because she just brought that. And so I'm glad it worked. I think she's fantastic, and she'll go far too, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're already sort of getting close on time, but I wanted to talk. I really loved the way the camera like moves to this. And I was wondering if you talk about working with Dennis, because there's such an elegance to the framing of everything in this, and I love the way that he was able to also, like, especially within the school, like capture sort of this reverence for the iconography of the Catholic Church, but also in a way also sort of bring out this sense of menace at the same time, but not in the way of where it was like, oh, we're working against the church, but just that there's like essentially this long standing battle between good and evil,
Right,
and how
right.
that's permeated through the years. And I just thought the way that it was reflected visually in here was really wonderful.
I'm glad to hear that, because that was obviously the visual motif that we were always working with, was the mixture of the ancient, they've been battling this for millennia, and of the hyper modern, because they are using technology and they're using all that stuff. And I mean, Dennis obviously is like an old pro. He shot I Know What You Did Last Summer and all that stuff. And I saw his reel, and it was just wonderful, because I think he kind of dislikes color as much as I do. So we were very much on the same page at pulling color out of this movie whenever we could, because the goal to me is always to find a neutral palette that gives you the elegance, but to then introduce colors that now have meaning. You know, if you have a whole room where there is no color and you put one red apple on the table, suddenly that apple visually explodes into your face, you know, and it's so powerful and it's so great. So it was the same here. That's what we were kind of going after. And then we shot 80% of this movie in the University of Sofia, which is a huge complex and has this really old world feel to it. But of course, you have to keep that interesting if you spend so much time within one building. I think Dennis did a really great job achieving that.
Absolutely. And I think what's great, what again about sort of the approach to this is like you have, you know, sort of this God, why can't I even think of the word? This tradition of priests who've like been, battling this stuff, as you said, for millennia and things like that. But there's sort of this young group of, people who come into the fold and sort of change the dynamic a little bit. And I'm just sort of curious, if things were to go well. I honestly think that's something, again, we just haven't seen presented in the subgenre that way. Is that something that you'd be considering, like you would consider exploring in the future? Because I just think that there's so much potential to like really, again, sort of change how we look at exorcism movies by some of the stuff that you guys were able to achieve here.
Are you asking specifically if there should be a sequel to Pray for the
Yes, that was sort of my fancy way of saying it without saying it.
I see. Well, I'm kind of two minds about the whole sequel discussion. On the one hand, I think sequel is a dirty word if you're talking about it while you're making the movie, because
Right.
I think it's always a mistake to hold anything back. Like the chances that you'll get a sequel are so minuscule. I always feel like give the audience everything you have in the original movie, every idea, every visual, everything, as if there will never be a sequel. And if then you should be lucky enough that the world wants a sequel, then it's a great problem to have, and then deal with it then. So I'm never planning for the sequel. On the other hand, exactly what you were saying, we do have a protagonist that we wanted to be iconic because she's breaking new ground. She is the new generation, exactly, taking over the battle. And of course, she's the first female exorcist in centuries and forever. So we always were striving for creating a character that is interesting enough and iconic enough that you would want to hear more stories about her in the world out there. Doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be a sequel, but you ideally come out of the movie craving that. Then we've done our job with the original movie. What then happens after that is a studio decision that so far no one has talked about because we don't know how well the movie is going to do. But creatively, that's definitely the extent to which we were discussing sequels.
Excellent. One last question before we sort of wrap, but I'm a really big believer that whenever you do something creative, that obviously you put a part of yourself into that project. But I'm curious, from looking at your experiences working on this, is there an aspect of your involvement with Pray for the Devil, like that might have impacted you personally or professionally in ways you weren't expecting? Now that you kind of sort of take a step back and look at your experiences, like in retrospect a little bit?
That's a great question. I hadn't thought about it, but now that you're asked, the first thing that springs to mind, I just saw the movie last night, the day before last, yesterday, and after not having seen it for weeks. And what was striking me was that Jackie, our sister Anne, going into this terrified, rather really being anywhere else in the world, but also not wanting to be anywhere else in the world. That is exactly me making a movie. Like, making a movie is terrifying because you have literally 100 people, a team of 100 people staring at you saying, tell us what to do. And you better be right, because if you send them in the wrong direction, you will pay for that mistake forever. So every morning that I go to set, I am nauseous. I want to throw up. If I could rather spend the day in the dentist chair, I would do that, But on the other hand, it's also such a rush, such a creative rush, making a movie and working with these creative people that are so talented that you not want to be anywhere else. And I think it's kind of exactly what Sister Anne is going through. She has to conquer what we talked about earlier. She has to conquer her fear somehow for something that she feels like for the greater good she has to do, kind of a thing.
Definitely. Well, Daniel, thank you so much. And for those of you listening, Pray for the Devil does come out October 28th from Lionsgate. And, for those of you who tune in every week, thank you so much for supporting Corpse Club. You can find out more about us at corpseclub.com or follow us over on Twitter at Corpse Club. And of course, for all your daily news, reviews, and interviews and fun things like that, please head over to dailydead.com. And for all of us, we're excited. It's Halloween season, so please enjoy yourselves. Until next time, everybody, stay scary.